YouTube, what's good? What's good? Hope you're having a great day today. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to kind of go over some of the Season 4 changes that they've made. I'm not going to spend entirely too much time talking about the actual patch notes like I have in some of my previous videos. Today we're just kind of going to go over the charts, what they say, what they look like, and where the meta is kind of going in my opinion. So let's just kind of get right into it. First, we're going to talk about the long-range meta, and then we'll go over short-range meta. So before this DG nerf, which if you didn't know, please crawl out of the rock you've been living under. The DG got severely nerfed. I've seen a lot of people using it still, probably because it's still pretty easy to use, but it is nowhere near in the meta conversation as it was a week ago. So that being said, I don't necessarily think that it really needed a nerf. I think that it was really easy to use and that it was pretty highly picked and selected, but I don't necessarily think that it needed to be completely nerfed into the ground, because I think that doing that has now shifted the meta in a direction that I don't think a lot of people are going to enjoy it going in, but I'll get into that in just a second. So that being said, I think they could have just messed with the bullet velocity a little bit more on the DG, turned it down just a little bit more. That way you were kind of not forced, but you were incentivized to use something like high grain, something like high velocity, rather than just building it for full recoil. That's what made it so good, is that you could just throw the barrel on there and it had, I think, like 1,050 meters per second of bullet velocity, that's pretty high for a lot of the fully automatic weapons that we've had over the life of this year of Warzone. So if you didn't know, as far as like time to kill goes, the Holger 26 LMG and the DG were almost one in the same gun before it got nerfed. So I think a lot of people are going to start to gravitate towards the Holger, but it's a little up in the air still because of how the Holger, I guess, feels. But I'll kind of talk about that when I get into more of breaking down what this specific chart that we're looking at kind of looks like. So, but just to kind of compare the DG and the Holger, this is post nerf. I wish the pre nerf was still on True Game Data, but as you can see, kind of up to this 20 meter range, or 17 really, the DG's still okay, but as you can kind of see, it significantly drops off. I mean, we're not even in the conversation with some weapons anymore. But before that nerf last week, this is what the DG looked like. The DG was like right in line with this. Besides, I think in this middle range, the DG kind of excelled a little bit better. But as far as like the rest of the long range meta is concerned, we have a lot of viable options right now. Some of these we've seen before. Some of them we haven't really messed with in a long time, just because they haven't been, I guess, good enough to matter. But even with the changes they've made, I think it's still going to gravitate in one central direction. So what I like to do when I use True Game Data is obviously put on 300 HP. I change everything to combination because there's no way that you're going to consistently hit chest, especially if somebody's moving, running around, or you're shooting somebody in the air or whatever, right? So as you can kind of see, the Subverter is kind of your best option up to 20 meters. And then from 20 meters all the way up until about 45, the meta is pretty open, I would say. A lot of these weapons are going to be based on what you feel comfortable using, but I think there's going to be a couple weapons that should stick out to you, I guess is the better way to say it. So after the SOA Subverter kind of drops off, the BP-50 is a really good option at all ranges, except for the magazine size. It's just not very good. 45 rounds is not enough to get you through fights when you're playing trios and quads. It's probably a good solo duos weapon. But the Holger 5.56 is still a really good option too. And then as you kind of creep up, a lot of these weapons will start to fall off. You have the Subverter back in there at a really good range, as well as the MTZ 5.56 and the SVA. So the SVA, is something that's kind of been in the meta conversation for a while. I don't like it. To me, it's just a really wonky gun. It's hard. It's weird to use. I don't necessarily think it's hard to use. I don't prefer the burst, and I think the recoil is a little bit too I'm not going to say hard to control, but it's a little bit too unmanageable when you get about 15 shots into the mag if you're on full auto. But one option that a lot of people like just completely miss is this STB 556. I mean, it's not the best close range, but as you kind of go further along into this chart, as far as distance goes, it keeps up really, really, really well. But then you still have this smaller magazine size. I've used it. It feels really good, kills really fast, but that magazine just really, really, really takes it away for me. But then you get outside this 50-meter range, and then you now have your 55-meter range, really, and then your BP50 and your Holger and your STB are going to be kind of your best options. After that, MTZ 556, and then when you start to get into these 1,000 plus times to kill, they're almost useless to use at long range. Which, granted, how many of your fights are you really going to take it over 55 meters? Me, not very many. But if you are going to take a substantial amount more, like if you play a lot more big map than you do Resurgence, you might want to take that into consideration as to what you're going to want to primarily use. So this is kind of where we're sitting. I couldn't include everything on here that I wanted to just because there's only 9 spaces. But these are kind of what I would consider the most easy to use weapons that are going to give you the most consistent times to kill, which both of those factors are or should be highly considered when you talk about the meta, right? So time to kill isn't always king. It's what you want to look for, but the ease of use is what I think kind of more solidifies what the meta is or should be. That's what made the DG so good, is it was so easy to use. Anybody could use it. So, like I said, this is kind of for the long range. I'll get into my opinions when I get to the classes. This is going to be for our short range meta. I think this meta is probably in the best spot that we've had it in quite a long time. While there weren't any changes to the BP50 conversion kits and the MCW conversion kits, they're not ruining the meta because there's a lot of drawbacks to using them. Like you have to double up on AR ammo, or you have to use it with a sniper or whatever, or you sacrifice mobility. So that's where I think the MCW is kind of at fault. Is the mobility on it is just plainly not very good. The ADS speed is but the sprint to fire speed is really bad. You can throw some attachments on there, but you sacrifice a lot of recoil, which if you're using it within 10 to 20 meters, recoil is not going to be that big of an issue. But I find myself getting caught with my pants down with my SMG out all the time. So I prefer something that is going to have a little bit lower recoil at that 15 to 20 meter range, just in case I have to challenge somebody from that far away. I'd rather have a gun that I can control. So if you build it the way I have it built, which I think is a really balanced build version of it, it's not going to have as much recoil. That's just me. BP50 conversion kit, it's kind of the second fastest, but right there with the Horus. But the BP50 has a little bit weird of a recoil pattern. I don't love it. It's fun to use. The mobility is really good. I see it as more of like an aggressive sniper support weapon, but I don't use it a ton. I haven't really seen it a lot since this new update because of the options that we have right now. They've, for whatever reason, thrown a conversion kit on the Lockman Shroud. I don't know why they didn't just buff the MW2 Lockman sub. I think a lot of people would have rather preferred that. I don't think anybody would have a problem with that weapon being back into the meta again, because it would feel really nostalgic, I think, unless they're planning to add an MP5 again secretly and we just don't know. But you sacrifice a lot of mobility with that gun. It's pretty slow when you throw on that conversion kit. Feels okay. Doesn't feel great. But as far as the Superi, however you want to say it, 46, that's my favorite gun right now. That might be the most fun SMG that they've put in Warzone in a long time. It has a really good strafe build. It has a really good sprinting mobility build that I'll show both of those in just a second. But it has a really good balanced TTK. Doesn't feel super broken. Doesn't feel super weak like the WSP9 and the Ram 9 do now, which is really disappointing. I was really hoping that both of those guns would stay in the meta conversation, but when you start to creep up to that 650, excuse me, when you start to creep up to that 650 time to kill in milliseconds, that's just kind of where it starts to drop off. While the WSP9 is still really good if you can hit a couple headshots, I don't think it's worth using anymore with the current options that we have now. So that being said, let's go ahead and just get into some of the classes that I've made. So these aren't going to be in a specific order. These are just what I decided to pick out and go with. So what I personally think the best option is going to be the Holger, just because it was just like the DG was before its nerf. So with this barrel, you're going to get 995 meters per second of bullet velocity. You can even take off the Zimming comp and put the Cassis brake in your 1047 meters per second. That's with high velocity. I think high velocity is better than high grain, because when you have high grain, your first 10 bullets of your spray are typically the most important when it comes to winning a gunfight. And when you have high grain on, you have considerably more vertical recoil with it, versus when you have high velocity on, you sacrifice a tiny bit of damage for way more recoil control, which I think is considerably more important when it comes to landing those first shots out of your spray, right? So this is very easy to use, very low recoil. I will say I don't think it feels as good as the DG did. It feels kind of wonky, feels kind of slow. Doesn't feel as overall consistent when getting those kills at long range. But as you can see, it barely moves. And I'm not even warmed up. And I'm hardly pulling down on the stick at all. So next is going to be the SOA Subverter. I still like the SOA. I used it a lot today playing, and it feels just like it did before. I know they nerfed it, but it doesn't feel like the worst thing in the world. I still think it's going to be really good. I just think that when you get to those longer ranges, it's going to suffer just a little bit if you are going up against somebody that has something like a Holger or maybe an SVA or an STB 556. But that's the tried and true class that we've used. You can even take off this optic and throw on high velocity or high grain if you want a little bit extra, or you can mess around with this build a little bit. You can take off support, throw on a stock, still use high velocity. I just think if you're going to use the Jack Glassless optic, you really, really, really want to use the underbarrel and the brake on there. So next is going to be the TAC Evolver Ray. Really easy to use, really low recoil, really good bullet velocity. It just kind of doesn't hit after that 35-meter range, which I guess if it's super accurate, that doesn't really matter as much. But you're going to lose some fights to other weapons with it just because it doesn't hit as hard. While you may be more accurate than the other person, it's just going to get outclassed a little bit. But try it out. I like to mess around with it. It's kind of like something I go to if I get bored, but in no way do I think it's the best. Next, Holger 556, still a really good, solid option. It just suffers in the bullet velocity category and its mag size, unfortunately. They've adjusted the recoil on it a little bit, so it is a little bit weird. So you could take off the suppressor and put on the Cassis brake or the Zimming comp just to get a little bit more recoil control, but that's going to turn it more into solely like a resurgence weapon. I would not use this weapon on big map. I don't like using it on big map. Maybe in solos because I can play a little bit more aggressive. But when you're taking fights from longer range and trios and quads, it's just not as good as I think its LMG counterpart is. Next is going to be the SVA, which, like I said, I just don't enjoy the SVA for whatever reason. It just feels really weird for me to use. And you might be wondering why I'm using this specific suppressor. The bullet velocity on this suppressor is absolutely unmatched, and it has no recoil negative effect like it does on some of the other suppressors that are used on this weapon. Like the sonic suppressor was kind of the main suppressor that everybody used on here previously, but it does add a little bit of recoil to it. But this echoless, when you throw it on here, I mean, you can spam this thing and it just doesn't move. This is with a grip and everything, but you can still just spam, and it's just very easy to use. Like I said, I just don't like it. I don't like having to burst. I would rather have a full auto weapon that I don't have to worry about bursting or my controller messing up, God forbid, or something like that. But when you put it into full auto, it just kind of, it shakes up and to the left just a little too much. You know, I'm not really trying that hard to control it, but I just don't think firing it in full auto is worth the drawback. It's just my opinion. So next is going to be the MTZ 5.56. Really good option. Has decent bullet velocity, coming in at around 830 or 840, I believe, or 822. So you can throw on the Cassis and push it back up to 866. But this is going to be a really good mid-range option as it falls off after you get to be about 40, 45 meters. I still think it's really good. I used it a little bit today as well, just messing around with it. Pretty low recoil. You can even take off the sight and put on a stock. I just don't really prefer the iron sights on this weapon because they feel a little bit too small and in your face. Kind of like the Ram 7 did, but the Ram 7 also felt a little bit more open and easier to use at longer ranges than this does. I feel like when I'm shooting somebody long range with this weapon, I feel like I just lose sight of them somehow. And just so you know, I'm not encouraging you to do this, but if you buy the Gundam skin in the store with this clinch pro barrel on it, I think it's called Aerial Beams. So when you shoot this weapon, you see all this gun smoke. It completely gets rid of it when you shoot this weapon with that specific barrel variant on this gun. Little pay to win. Don't agree with it, but it's in the game. Might be bugged. They might fix it. I don't know. And then that's going to kind of wrap it for my favorite long-range meta weapons so far. There were more on the chart. I didn't make a class for all of them just because I didn't really feel like it was needed per se, based off what the chart said. But, you know, you could throw the STB in this mix. You can throw the TAC Eradicator in this mix. You could throw the new Cast-Off 7.62 conversion kit in this mix. You do have to sacrifice some attachments for bullet velocity. But that is a very, very, very easy low recoil option. I'll show it to you. In no way do I think it's the best, but it is pretty fun to use. This weapon has pretty much negative... Oh, no. Oh, that's annoying. I'll just show you in regular lobby. This has pretty much negative recoil to it. So, I mean, this... I'm not even touching... I'm not touching my stick in any way with this weapon. I'll even show you here. So, we're just not even... not moving. But the bullet velocity does suffer. It's not really good at long range, but it is going to be really good in those middle ranges, about where some of the other weapons are going to fall. But you can get about 830 on here with the ZLR Talon muzzle and high grain rounds. You could even take this off and go high velocity, get a little bit more. I just think it really is going to need that little extra bump in damage, so that's why I chose to go with high grain. And even though it adds a little bit of recoil, this conversion kit just completely takes away all of it. So, that being said, as far as the close range meta goes, far and away, I think right now is going to be this build of the Saperi. This is what I call the sprint build, because you can really, really, really crank your tac sprint speed on this build. So you can see over here on the right, it is 8.2 meters per second. That's pretty fast when it comes to sprint speed. I mean, you can mess around with it in the firing range and kind of see just like how fast you are, like right as soon as you start sprinting. Yeah, I would even put it with another weapon and just see how it feels. But I think this is the best for like close range combat because you can really sprint and slide right past somebody. The iron sights are super clean. It has very, 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 very little recoil. Bounces a little bit from left and right, but it's just so easy to use, and it still has really good bullet velocity, even with this barrel on it. I mean, 556 meters per second for an SMG is pretty decent, all things considered. And you can take this barrel off and use something else, or you can crank it up even higher than that if you prefer something that has better bullet velocity. Another build for this one is going to be the strafing build, which is, this is how I have this build. I have it with the Jack Cutthroat stock and the Zulu barrel and the XRK Edge underbarrel. As you can kind of see, the strafe speed on this thing is actually insane, which is why I like to use it with my sniper. Because because you can challenge a little bit longer ranges with it. But you can peek corners with this. You can, shoot somebody through a doorway, like strafe through the doorway, and really throw them off guard. And if you're fighting somebody that's on M&K, they're not going to be able to hit you up close, really. And if you are fighting somebody from like a close range, but closer to the mid range, I guess you could say, they're gonna. If you can really learn how to strafe back and forth with it at a good rate or to one direction, you're just going to be considerably much harder to hit. So, those are two of my favorite sub builds for the Saperi. It's pretty much like all I use. I have not touched the Horus since I've really grown to like this Saperi. But as far as a Horus goes, this is how I would build it. I would use the light barrel with the Zim and Comp, DR6 hand stop, 48 round mag, and then the NIDAR scope. And to kind of show you what it looks like when it shoots, it's not super bad recoil. When you get about halfway through the mag, it gets a little squirrely. But it's really only good 10 meters and in. Like I said earlier in my video, that I get caught with my pants down a lot with my SMG out, so I'd rather have something that's a little bit easier to control. And as far as like your other two options that we talked about, looking at the charts, the MCW conversion kit, this is how I normally build it. This is what I think the most balanced build is between mobility, aim down sight, and recoil control. Nothing super drastic or anything like that. Still has the best time to kill up to that 20 meter range. Definitely a better sniper support than I would think would be using it as a secondary when you're using an already automatic weapon like the Holger SVA or whatever, right? And then finally, for the BP50 build, it's pretty much what this variant is from the Battle Pass. I usually throw on this laser, and then I'll do Cassis brake for my muzzle. And I usually don't use an optic, just because I prefer the iron sight better. I don't like the way the optic shakes back and forth, because this build has so much recoil on it. As you can see, like it just shoots left and right too much for me. While it's not that much variation, I would prefer to just not have an optic with it, so I don't have to worry about tracking it. I feel like I can just track better with the iron sight on it. So, and obviously right now, I think the hard meta, if you haven't figured it out right now, is going to be the Car 98. This is the build that I have for it. This is kind of what everybody's been using. You can mess around with this a little bit. You can take off the laser, put on no stock, but then it's going to zoom out your scope a little bit, which I don't really enjoy. If you want me to be completely honest with you, I think putting this weapon into the game was a huge mistake. While it is fun to use, it's not very fun when you have to go against it so much. Because now I think it is better than the XRK Stalker was when the XRK first came out. It has better bullet velocity, or it has pretty comparable bullet velocity. I think the XRK was around 1100. This is around 980, which is still pretty fast for a marksman rifle. A lot of the other marksman rifles, even the semi-automatic ones, it's hard to achieve that with equal amount of balanced recoil, right? So, but now we have another one-shot kill sniper that's pushing 85 meters. You do have to get a headshot, but I don't think the damage is the problem with this weapon. I think it's the aim down sight speed and the cocking speed, the speed at which you put another bolt or put another bullet in the chamber, because you can lay down shots at a really high bullet velocity very quickly, which I was kind of alluding to earlier in the video, talking about pushing the meta in a direction that I don't think a lot of people are going to like. While we do have some automatic weapons that are cranking out 1,000 meters per second bullet velocity, you can still get a kill faster with a car from a highly skilled player that is using it. I mean, I think this car is so easy to use that it makes people who aren't very good at sniping or wouldn't normally be very good at sniping pretty decent with it. Just because, like I said, it aims down sight so fast. And if you hit somebody in the head from however far, 85 meters away, I mean, it's just so easy to use, in my opinion. And, you know, I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments that'll say something about skill issue this or whatever. I don't care. Go argue with your mom. Does not matter to me. I just think that when you have this really broken sniper meta, it's almost like you have to use it to be competitive, especially on big map. It forces people to play slower because you have all these people sitting in buildings and waiting, and sitting in buildings and waiting, sitting on top of buildings with a car. And it's not just one person on the team using it. It's 2 and 3 and 4 and quad sometimes. And it just makes the game unplayable in some ways. Now, I don't know what the fix would be. Unfortunately, I think that maybe reducing that cocking speed or some of the bullet velocity would matter. I'm fine with the range being where it's at because you do have to hit a headshot, but either the bullet velocity, aim down sight time, or the bolt speed is going to have to be what changes. If it stays like this, the way it is, it will be in the meta for a considerably long time. I mean, it would be the only used sniper. I think since this came out, I have not died to a different marksman / sniper rifle since this came out. I know a lot of people wanted this back, so I promise I'm not trying to be a hater or be weird or anything like that. I just think I think this meta could become really unhealthy for the game if they don't put something else in its place, whether it be an automatic weapon or something to just compete with this gun at longer-ish ranges. Because you can play aggressive with this weapon, you can play back with this weapon. It really molds to you, which is typically not how a marksman or sniper rifle should operate. And people are going to be like, well, it wasn't that bad in Warzone 1. Well, in Warzone 1, all of the assault rifles and LMGs had considerably higher bullet velocities. It's upwards of 1,100 just standardly, right? And plus, in Warzone 1, you had to account for travel time and bullet drop. So the one-shot kills that you were getting with the car at those longer ranges were not as consistent as the ones that you would be getting right now, because there's virtually no bullet drop in this game. It only when you get into really long ranges is there bullet drop. But if you can stay within its one-shot kill range, there's almost none. I'm pretty sure there is none. So that's why like I said, I kind of think that the meta could potentially move in a very negative direction if they don't nerf this or buff something else. I will be straightforward and say I'm not really a fan of nerf. I'd rather them buff other things. I don't want them to buff things to make them completely broken and stupid, but I think nerfing things into the ground just kind of makes the game really boring, whenever they could just buff something in something else's place and we have a new, fun, fresh weapon to use in the meta. So that being said, that's going to kind of be it for me as far as what we're sitting at with the meta right now. I appreciate you guys for taking the time to watch more than you know. If you don't mind, please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe if you'd like to come back. It's free. It helps me out a ton. I do stream every day on Twitch and Kick. We're doing some pretty special things on Twitch right now. My channel's been growing substantially over the last month. We're doing a giveaway on the weekend of the 15th. If you'd like to come through for that, we're going to be giving away some cash prizes. So anyways, hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for watching.